Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Ahmadi, and I like to talk about psychoanalytic theories. Um, there were people before Freud who came up with psychoanalytic theories, and the position was mostly about issues like determinism, instinctual drives, and the unconscious. However, it was Sigmund Freud who highlighted the essential role played by early childhood experiences. Freud's position was that a person's psychological response and behavior were reflections of biological instinctual drives. So, this is the more uh, animalistic part of us, is the instinctual part of us that basically is experiencing life through satisfying the instinctual demands that has, like hunger or uh, asking for attention and things like that. Satisfying our instinctual drive for pleasure shifted throughout our early years of development, moving from the mouth to oral stimulation to anus, the experience of control, and eventually to the genital and inclusion of sex role behaviors and identification. And there are two big part of um, Freud psychology is goes through the demand for pleasure through sex and also aggression, and he believes that the conflicts that brings to our lives and demand for those two um, makes the rest of our lives have a big impact on the rest of our lives. Freud posited that it was during our childhood, the first 6 years. This is the first 6 years that you spend with your people who care for you, hopefully your mother and father, and you go through attachment to them and through finding yourself through that attachment. And again, that's a much later, but what he believed was that that first 6 years developed ways to resolve conflicts between the drive for pleasure and the demand. So that 6 years, we are learning how to control and how to get going between the um, our desire for pleasure, satisfying it, and the demands of the environment that we live in. Um, and the demands, often repressive, encountered in reality. For Freud, it was this dynamic process of conflict resolution that he believed shaped one's development and later lifestyle. So, what happened in the first 6 years in your life um, pretty much set up the rest of your life. It seems a little bit um, too much. But later on, there were other psychoanalysts that kind of opened that up and came out with ideas. Klein came out with ideas of attachment theory and the self, and expanded on what Freud had started. Um, and he also has this table that has the different psychosexual stages of the development, which the stage of the oral stage, which is between birth to one, an infant's primary interaction with the world, which is basically through his mouth. And again, Freud emphasized a lot about the sexuality even at that age, instinctual sexuality or libido, which at the same time was a drive that brought energy of life to the toddler or later on to the infant and the toddler later on. Pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. If this need is not met, the child may develop an oral fixation later in life. An example of that would be thumb sucking and smoking, fingernail biting. So next time you see somebody biting their fingers, you might know where that comes from. The anal stage, where the development of new cells and the control provided by those cells, sphincters, the focus shifts from oral stimulation to, this is a different sense here though, this is where the infant tries to control his body. There's a sense there that he could control his muscles, controlling his bladder and bowel movements. Toilet training is a primary issue with children and parents. Well, I've gone through that, and it is an interesting part of life. Then there is the phallic stage between the age 3 to 6. Energies shift to genitals. It is during this period that children develop an attraction to the opposite sex parent. There's a whole theory there now about the way the child, the male child, falls in love with his mother, has that attraction, and starts hating his father. But that's a little bit later on. Oedipus complex. It is also at this period that children adopt the values and characteristics of same-sex parent and form the superego, the better part of their self. But again, this is the same idea of mirroring, modeling, mimicking. You're learning from your environment and how you go through it with the people who raise you. The phallic stages from 3 to 6, then we have the latent 6 to 11. Children develop social skills, value, and relationships with peers and adults outside of the family. And then genital stage, 11 to 18. People develop a strong interest in the opposite sex, and the onset of puberty causes the libido to become active. Once again, if the development has been successful to this point, the individual will continue to develop into a well-balanced person. Well, so in his psychoanalytical theories, those 6 years were very important. And what happened in the conflict of between your instinctual desire and trying to satisfy that, and what is around you and the demands of your environment, you kind of build your character. We're also supposed to talk about spirituality and the need of it, and how it relates to this theory. And actually, this is an interesting coincidence, because Freud had a friendship with Carl Jung, which was a younger, no, he was never a student of Freud. Jung always said, I was the student of Boiler and learned from him. But Jung was much younger, about maybe 10 or 15 years younger than Freud, and they started having this like mentor and student relationship However, Jung did not think that Freud has really thought out his theories and thought that he's limited in his theory of you know, that everything is based on sexuality and aggression, and what happens to that, how becomes the base of your life. Jung thought there was a lot more into what becomes the life of a human being, and there were other things that were important. And some part of what Jung believed in was the whole world of consciousness and unconscious. Freud had come up with the word of unconscious, but he believed in what was the personal unconscious, which was a thin layer underneath the consciousness, and it was personal, whatever, in a way that had become whatever was repressed in your life kind of ended up down there in that personal unconscious. However, Jung believed in collective unconscious, which means like all the evolution that brought us physically and has happened to us physically, there were also evolution in our psyche and in ourselves, and how they have developed the whole idea of the consciousness. And in a way, this is where he separated, and he got into spirituality. And his spirituality was based on Christianity and based on Christ. He saw Christ as an archetype of an individuated person. And it was interesting for me because I also read the article about are we doing all we can about spirituality in schools? I studied psychology and art and got my EDD at Teachers College, and about the same time there's an institute in Teachers College, Columbia University, called SMBI, a Spirituality Mind Body Institute. And the person who was founder of it, founder of the SMBI, Dr. Lisa Miller, was my mentor. So I did take classes in spirituality, and I did also teach classes for SMBI in the relationship between psychology and art. And of course, spirituality is always part of the Jungian psychology, because the whole process is about man getting to know himself, and how goes through life by making the unconscious conscious. That self-awareness that we talk about so much is part of this whole thing. I mean, Jung believes that the privilege of a life fully lived is for the man to get to know himself. That's all. Making unconscious conscious. So Dr. Miller was actually able to write a book, The Spiritual Child, which became a bestseller. And in that, he has scientifically backed theories and instructs in this book. And that's the way she talks about spirituality. So it can be done. And I personally believe that we do need spirituality more than anything in life. Because part of spirituality is that self-awareness, getting to know yourself, and also the process of individuation, getting to know your incapacities, and getting to know your shadows, and how to regulate them and control them. The shadows are the things that you do not know about yourself, and there's plenty of it. So this can be done through dream analysis, but the whole idea of a self-actualization, which is getting to know yourself, and which is one of the first part of being a counselor, because you have a big responsibility as a counselor. And if you know yourself, you know how to regulate your emotions and yourself, you're ahead of everybody else. So Dr. Miller and SMBI was trying to push the same thing, spirituality in school. And the classes used to be start with meditation. And we used to have meditation also throughout the day. We gathered the students by ourselves. And when I was reading the article, he's quite right. There's a fear about religion in its school and government. Again, I think if our forefathers tried to get away from religion because they wanted to get it away from politics and the government, because church was so cruel and had so much power in 18th and 19th centuries. But we do need a spirituality in school, because spirituality, as he says it beautifully, is spirituality is communication with God, a union with God. Fowler's 1981, a stage of faith development. And Perry, stages of intellectual development, quest for a spiritual development in an innate aspect of human development is an innate. So spirituality means a spiritual development, and that is part of development that we foresee for our counselors, to find the godly part of themselves and bring the image of Jesus with themselves into the counseling room. Again, not as something that they promote, but have that attitude, have that personality, have that empathy with them. So quest for a spiritual development is an innate aspect of human development. This is Chandler et al., 1992. And then creating certain conditions in which a spiritual experience more likely to occur. A spiritual development and a spirituality are interchangeable. This is Haronian, 1972. Again, he talks a lot in that article, being receptive to an unexplained being in one's relationship, and also talks about regulating our emotions, and again having more control over ourselves, and also about the connectedness that that sort of a spirituality would create. In a way, we live in a world that is so hyper, that is so out of tune. There is so much chaos there that having that inner peace, having that um, peace of mind, for us starting the class with the meditation made us more centered, and that allowed us to learn better. So, in many ways, I agree with this 100,000%. And again, it also says that spiritual development involves the process of continually transcending. Uh, Spiritual development involves developing greater connections to self, and it's the whole idea of awareness and consciousness, being aware of our lives, being conscious to our lives. So I am definitely 100% for spirituality in school and teaching developmental spirituality. I wrote my thesis for my EDD on how being an artist helps human beings that to transcend to a different level, because it's being connected to yourself, it's being connected to your consciousness and awareness, and that makes a big difference in life. I enjoyed doing this, and thank you.